Hello everybody and welcome to this webinar on making a good safeguarding adults referral and understanding the process. My name is Claire Nixon and I'm the Newcastle Safeguarding Adults Board Coordinator, and I'm joined by Kerry Cook, who is a Safeguarding Adults Manager in Newcastle. We ran this webinar during Safeguarding Adults Week in 2023, and we felt it would be helpful to record it to get to as wide an audience as possible.
So over to me. So we thought it was helpful just to start with, what's people's understanding? What does safeguarding adults mean? To basically challenge some of those myths. I think sometimes the myth that a referral comes into the safeguarding team and the safeguarding team deal with everything, and that's all you need to do when referring into safeguarding. So it's really important that we explain what safeguarding adults process is and what it means, and that's what we hope today we will achieve through this webinar. So if we look in a little bit more detail on the next slide, we'll go in to explain exactly what the purpose of an inquiry is. If you're all right to change the slide for me, Claire, please. So the objectives of an inquiry really is to refer in to safeguarding adults process because it's the local authority's duty to coordinate that inquiry, but all agencies must cooperate with us, and it's not that the local authority in adult social care are then responsible for every part of safeguarding. Our role is to kind of establish those facts, speak to all the partners, speak to referrers, anyone who might have information, so we can kind of look at that information and establish what the risk levels are, what the kind of support needs are, and most importantly, making sure that we involve that adult in that process, understanding what their views and wishes are. And the whole purpose of that safeguarding inquiry, it's a multidisciplinary process. It's to kick off that process for everybody to work together and be able to share information within a formal framework. So the whole point of it is that we kind of be able to assess what the needs of that person are. What do they need in order to be safe? How are we all going to do that collectively so that they're protected from abuse and neglect in line with what their wishes are? And then we make decisions as to what those actions are that are required by everybody, and who's going to take forward those actions. And then we're able to follow up if those actions have been achieved, how successful they've been, because ideally what we want to do is achieve for that adult to be as safe as they can be, and that they're working towards recovery, and that they've got the right support in place to do that, and there's the right risk plans in place to be able to kind of reduce any risks that they may face. So that's what the process is. It's a process to all work together. It's not just that the referrals come into adult social care and that we have all the magic answers. We can only do it working together, and it gives us a process to be able to do that. Next slide, please, Claire. So why are we doing this really? I think it's really important to know that we've had a massive increase in referrals into adult social care and into safeguarding, and Claire will explain some of the figures around that. But ultimately what we want to do is get the best outcome for the service user. We want to have good quality referrals coming in. So it's really important you know what the criteria is for safeguarding adults procedures to apply, so that you can provide us with the right information that helps us look at it all and assess those risks and determine what information we need for other people and what we might need to do going forward. And that starts with that referral coming in. So it's really important we help you understand how to make a good referral. It supports agencies to be able to provide the information, really, as I've said, so that we can make the right decisions once that referral comes into us. And once we've got that information, we can decide together what is the right response for that service user to get them the best response the first time a referral comes in. And yes, we do need to reduce the number of referrals coming in. We know a huge amount of referrals that come into us do not meet the safeguarding adults criteria. A lot of them are welfare concerns. There are other referral routes, or some of them are around mental health concerns that are not around abuse and neglect. So what we want to be able to do is get referrals in that are clearly following the correct process for safeguarding procedures, so we can focus on those. They're the most important ones. They're the ones we need to be able to get to first as quickly as possible. So we need you to help everybody understand what meets the criteria for a Section 42 inquiry, and that other referrals are going down other referral pathways, so we're not overwhelming the safeguarding adults process. Thanks, Claire.
Thanks, Kerry. I think you've touched on some of this in that last slide, but I think it is helpful to look at the local data in terms of the volume of referrals and the conversion rate into safeguarding activity in Newcastle. And this data is one of the main reasons why we're delivering this webinar and wanting to improve the quality of safeguarding adults referrals. So as you can see from the slide there, 52% of safeguarding adult referrals made between April 2022 and March 2023 did not meet the criteria for a safeguarding adults concern. And that is a nationally defined criteria, and I'm going to come on to that in the next slide. And this trend has continued into 2023-24, so it's not something that was just an anomaly last year, it has continued. So of the 9,801 concerns that we received that met the criteria, 8,335 of those met the criteria for a Section 42 inquiry. Again, that's a legally defined criteria, and Kerry's going to come along and talk about that shortly. So ideally, we'd want the number at the top, this 20,257, to be much smaller and much closer to the number of safeguarding adults concerned. And Kerry alluded to some of the most common outcomes for referrals that do not meet the criteria. A large number of those are for general social care action, so information, advice, signposting, assessment or review in relation to social care needs. So they're diverted away from the safeguarding adults process and into adult social care, to Social Care Direct for their action. The next most common outcome of referrals that don't meet criteria are concerns about a person's mental health, but no associated abuse or neglect. And then we also get referred in a number of referrals about abuse or neglect, but the person is at risk doesn't have an appearance of care and support needs. So one of the most common examples of those might be a domestic abuse concern where the victim doesn't have care and support needs and therefore wouldn't fall under safeguarding adults criteria. So that's just a little look at our data, and as I say, one of the main reasons why we are doing this webinar. On to the criteria for a safeguarding adults concern. As I said in the previous slide, it's a legally defined term. It's linked to the Care Act, and national guidance was issued recently to further assist with understanding. It's actually an extremely low bar for referral, but you must consider two key criteria as referrer. Is the adult at risk someone who has needs for care and support? And are they experiencing or at risk of abuse or neglect? And you only have to have a reasonable cause to suspect. You don't need to be in possession of the full facts. Kerry is going to talk you through what is meant by parts A and B, but I also want to highlight that there is no threshold around harm. So in children's referral into children's safeguarding child protection, there is a significant harm threshold that isn't for adults. But that's why some of the key principles of safeguarding adults are important, those on the right hand side there. They're really important considerations for referrers into safeguarding adults procedures, particularly empowerment and proportionality. We're going to come on to this in more detail, but it is important that in addition to considering the criteria for a safeguarding adults concern, you are involving the adult at risk, empowering them to make decisions about their safety wherever possible, and also taking proportionate action. So one example I often give of this is we've got self-neglect as a category of abuse within safeguarding adults procedures. It wouldn't always be proportionate to refer low-level self-neglect concerns via safeguarding adults procedures without exploring other options to manage that concern or risk, and in particular involving the person in the decision-making about what they want to happen. The link on the slide there takes you to the guidance from the Local Government Association and the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, which aims to improve people's understanding of what constitutes a safeguarding adults concern.
Okay, so I think it's back over to me again to kind of look a little bit more detail. What does care and support needs actually mean? Now, excuse me, when we're talking about care and support needs, it's really important that you consider the impact on the person's well-being and their activities of daily living skills. But you can make a referral regardless of whether adult social care are providing any support, commission support, whether that be in the home or residential care or anything like that. They do not need to be providing a commissioned service. But when we look at the care and support needs, these are the care and support needs that we would look at when completing a Care Act assessment of needs for someone. So we're looking at, are there concerns around managing and maintaining their nutrition, their personal hygiene, toileting needs, being appropriately clothed, being able to make use of their home safely? Are they able to maintain a habitable home environment? Are there issues with developing and maintaining relationships, accessing work, education, volunteering, making use of the community? And do they have any care and responsibilities for a child? So they're the things that we would look at. So in your referrals, it's really helpful to us, the local authority, when we're looking at concerns, if you can identify where they might be having some difficulties considering these appearance of care and support needs. Now, what's also important is that you highlight to us what you think that person's vulnerability is. They don't need to have a diagnosis, but again, it's helpful if we can have some understanding of, is there a concern around a mental health difficulty, a physical health issue, substance misuse, cognitive impairment, learning needs, a sensory impairment, brain injury. If you can highlight to us, now again, I know that's sometimes difficult, but you'll sometimes have a view as a professional on what you're concerned about, where that person's vulnerability is. So again, really, really helpful to us if you can identify what vulnerability that person have, and maybe they have multiple ones, that it is that's impacting on their ability to be able to meet all of those needs. And if we'll just go on to the next slide, if that's all right, please. So really important that you highlight to us what you think that abuse or neglect is. And as Claire touched on, self-neglect is also a category that we would look at. So being really clear about kind of, what's being put in place to kind of resolve that issue, or the person's refusing to engage in support, then you're looking at kind of, there is self-neglect there, or the level of risk that self-neglect causes. And these are the categories of abuse that we look at. That doesn't have to be just a one-off incident. I mean, obviously, sometimes there is a one-off incident that's happened on a certain time or date that you want to tell us about. Sometimes professionals are working with someone and there's a whole host of stuff, or you're concerned someone's at risk of being abused. Something might not have happened yet, but you're concerned about it. You need to let us know really what that kind of abuse or neglect is that you're concerned about. Is it neglect within a care home, or some family member caring for someone that's not able to meet their needs, and whether that's intentional or whether it's not? Is there, concern about sexual harm, sexual exploitation? Is there emotional harm? Is there hoarding? Is there real concerns around the state of the property conditions? Is it discriminatory? Is it financial abuse or exploitation? Physical abuse, domestic abuse, organisational issues within providers, paid workers, volunteers. So if you've got a concern that there's a volunteer or professional that is a potential risk to a group of people or someone, again, that's something that you need to be referring into us on, considering the PIP-UP guidance that we've developed around actions that need to be taken either by the unit or by your agency around any disclosures or actions needed. And we've got modern day slavery as a category of abuse. And I've touched on sexual exploitation, but within this, there's also concerns around criminal exploitation, county lines, whether it's forced shoplifting, whether it's bank accounts being used fraudulently for transfers of money, whether it's home takeover. This is something that we need professionals to be really switched on to more and more about. The lack of choice and the fear that's often takes place when somebody is completely taken over somebody's home, and that would sit within the concerns around criminal exploitation. So they're the things that you need to be alerted to, and they're what you need to tell us what you're concerned about and why. So the more you can put in the referral, but please don't think it doesn't have to be War and Peace. Please keep the referral as concise as you can, because obviously managers need to triage a huge number of referrals, and they want to be able to find out exactly what it is that they need to know as quickly as possible, so we can decide what we need to do with it as quickly as possible to get the right response for the person. So obviously Claire's touched on what the referral criteria is to make a concern. We then have to apply further criteria when it comes into us to determine if it does need a Section 42 inquiry. So as I said, we're looking at what we think their needs for care and support might be, whether a local authority commissioning a service to meet those needs or not, that doesn't matter. What is the level of risk and abuse? What type is it? But then we're looking at, okay, so as a result of those needs, are they able to protect themselves from that abuse or neglect? We'll also be looking at whether you've spoken to the person about making that referral and what their views are and what they want to happen. What they want to happen might be very different to what professionals want to happen. And we also need to be really careful and listen to service users. We don't want to go ahead and just go ahead with a load of actions that could place them at further risk as well. So we need to understand what their views are. Of course, we do touch on it. There might be times when the person doesn't agree to a referral and you might still need to make one, but we'll cover that. So we need to consider really what inquiries we think are necessary to decide what actions needed to be taken. So that'll often involve talking to the referrer, talking to other agencies are involved, or also thinking about other agencies who might not be actively involved but might have information, and that would start off the inquiry. But when we're looking about really, is that person able to protect themselves? There are certain things that we will consider and look at in a bit more detail. So if you can include this on your referral, again, that helps us without us having to make further inquiries to kind of establish that. It's really important to note as well that local authorities do have the duty as well under the Care Act, where we can progress inquiries under the wellbeing principle if safeguarding adults inquiries don't apply, where there is a concern that somebody might be at a high level of risk, and we're still needing a multi-agency response to that. But in Newcastle, we will tend to use safeguarding adults procedures to have that formal process because it's trusted, it's respected, and it gives us everything we need from within our policies and procedures. So if we just go on, Claire, if that's all right, to look at what we mean by being unable to protect themselves. So we're talking about, is the person able to physically remove themselves from that situation? You know, do they have a physical disability? Are they able to mobilize? Or is there something else that's making it impossible for them to leave that situation? Are they being controlled, groomed, coerced? Is there undue influence over them? Maybe there's huge fear or there's somebody else preventing professionals and services having access to them. So we need to be aware if you're concerned that there is somebody who might be controlling, coercing or preventing professionals having access. Do we have concerns whether they have capacity to make decisions? There might be concerns around cognitive impairments or significant mental health difficulties that impacting on their decision making. That's something that you would be needing to look at to override consent, because if they don't have capacity to make decisions, how are they able to protect themselves? So it's something that you might be thinking about. You might not know the answer, but you might have concerns about it. Please let us know if it is something you have a concern about and why you have that concern. Are they using substances, alcohol, or illegal substances, legal substances that will also be impacting on their ability to keep themselves safe? If somebody is using substances day in, day out, and they're intoxicated by whatever means, they're not going to be in a situation that they can keep themselves safe at all for a huge number of reasons. You know, have they experienced significant trauma? Are they constantly in a trauma response to everything? Because if that's the case, they also might not be in a situation where they're able to keep themselves safe. There might be a huge dependence on the people that are causing them harm. As touched on, there's grooming, there's Stockholm syndrome. Maybe they don't see that that person's actually causing them harm, or they might be fully dependent on that person to provide their care needs. And obviously within that is being manipulated by various different people. And do they even recognize whether abuse is occurring or not? So if the more you can tell us about any of that, the more it helps us decide what actions we need to do going forward. Thanks, Claire. We can move on to the next one.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Claire, you're doing that one.
No worries, Kerry. So, as referred to earlier, the involvement of the adult at risk is a really important part of referring a safeguarding concern, but it's not the be all and end all. So there might be reasons or circumstances where consent can't be obtained or consent needs to be overridden, and these circumstances are listed on the slide. So the adult at risk might lack capacity, that needs to be properly explored and best interest decisions made if there are concerns about the person's ability to make decisions about a particular issue. There might be other children or adults at risk, and it would be in the public interest to override consent. And I think the most common scenario we see around this is when the staff are implicated or people in a position of trust. The alleged abuser might have care and support needs themselves, and they might be at risk. So there might be a duty of care to them. There might be concerns that a serious crime has been committed. Kerry touched on undue influence, but we might have a concern that the adult's decision-making ability is influenced by control or coercion. The risk might be unreasonably high, and we've got that duty of care to take action. So I think the main take-home message from this is that wherever practicable and wherever possible, we should be looking to seek the consent of the adult before taking action, before making a referral into safeguarding adults procedures. However, and this is a big however, there may be circumstances when we can't get that consent, and that shouldn't deter you from making a safeguarding adults referral. We would just expect that you would be putting in your referral why you weren't able to seek that person's consent or why you were overriding that person's consent. A bit more on what we refer to as making safeguarding personal, or MSP, as it's sometimes shortened to. This just means putting people at the centre of safeguarding adults work. It means doing with people, not to them. So it means that the work that we do in safeguarding adults is person-led, is outcome-focused and focused on the outcomes that the person wants. And it involves that person at risk in the process and enhancing their involvement, choice and control, hopefully improving their quality of life, well-being and safety. And it reflects one of the key principles of safeguarding adults, which is empowerment. And when that's translated as an I statement, that is, I am asked what I want as the outcomes from the safeguarding process, and these directly inform what happens. Outcome focus means that we have a clear understanding of what the adult at risk or their representative wants to happen about the concern or risk, and these views are then central to the actions that we take as part of the safeguarding adults inquiry. The adult or their representative, so that could be a family member or an advocate, should be involved from the beginning of the safeguarding adults process, unless there are exceptional circumstances. So those circumstances we were talking about at the, on the previous slide, so things like it might put them at increased risk of abuse or harm. They should be asked what they want to happen and ask for their permission for information to be shared about them. Referrers should be able to give an overview of the safeguarding adults process to the adult at risk or representative. Now, this doesn't have to be an in-depth explanation of the multi-agency safeguarding adults procedures. It might be something as simple as, it will involve me sharing information with adult social care, who will speak to you and agencies involved in your care and support to investigate the abuse and protect you from harm. In some circumstances, as a referrer, you might also be the best placed person to be a point of contact for that adult at risk. So I'm going to make this referral with your permission, and I will let you know what is happening as soon as I can. And then as it proceeds through the safeguarding process, you might be best placed to keep them updated if they're not actively involved, for instance, in attending safeguarding meetings. I think one of the things that we found when we've been doing work generally to try and improve making safeguarding personal, that people can feel quite daunted about doing it. But it is really important that we do it. So we have produced a Making Safeguarding Personal short guide, and there is a link to that at the end of the presentation. And that's just got some helpful conversation starters to have with people who you're concerned about, and to try and get information from them about what they want to happen. A little bit about transitional safeguarding. So we have locally in Newcastle a transitions protocol, which sets out the arrangements for young people who are approaching adulthood, whose circumstances might mean they would benefit from safeguarding under adults procedures. Children's social care, who've got responsibility up until that child turns 18 for their safety and welfare, have the opportunity to refer into safeguarding adults procedures from when that young person is age 17 and a half. And that allows for early sharing of information and allows to plan for support and risk management when that person turns 18, because we know there are different legal frameworks and different options available to keep that person safe. The Safeguarding Adults Manager would hopefully liaise closely with children's social care and decide whether a strategy meeting is required in terms of safeguarding adults, and that would happen 1 month prior to that person turning 18, and the safeguarding inquiry would remain open throughout the transition period. The information at the top of the slide there, I think it's important to note what the Care Act talks about in terms of transition and provisions for young people transitioning to adulthood. And it's not only for those people who are already receiving children's services, but those who are likely to have needs when they turn 18. And there's information on there as well about when somebody has a right to refuse a transition assessment. However, the local authority must undertake an assessment if it suspects that a child is experiencing or at risk of abuse or neglect. So there's quite strong messages within the Care Act about ensuring that there is a smooth and safe transition for those moving from children's to adult services, and hopefully our local safeguarding transition protocol assists with that. So thinking about the practicalities of making a multi-agency safeguarding adults referral, and I suppose it's helpful to point out at this point that we know not everybody watching or listening to this webinar will be responsible for making a multi-agency referral. You might have somebody within your organisation who you report concerns to, and it's their responsibility to refer on a multi-agency basis. So it might be a line manager, or you might have a specialist safeguarding team or a designated safeguarding lead who would then report on a multi-agency basis. But I'm just going to take you through the practicalities. I think the key message is that if you are a professional, we expect a written referral to be made. So we wouldn't accept referrals made over the phone or via email. We would expect that a referral form is completed, and the way that you do that now is to use our online referral form, which can be accessed via the link there. We have recently revised our referral form, and because we are only using an online referral form, we can now include mandatory questions. So that means we expect all the answers to be answered. And there are not sure options, so we don't always expect you to have all the information, but we do expect people to have considered each of the questions and give a response. Excuse me. And sometimes a reason why you don't know certain things, just to, again, to allow the social worker or the team manager that will be coordinating that inquiry from the local authority's perspective to direct those inquiries as effectively as possible. We've stopped using a Word version that we used to have of our referral form, and hopefully this just makes it a simpler system for professionals. And what I would say is all the questions in the referral form are asked for a reason, and they've all got important reasons behind them. It's important as well to point out that members of the public do not need to use a referral form. They can tell us about safeguarding concerns in a number of different ways. So they can use a referral form if they wish, but they can also contact one of the professionals that might be involved, that they're aware of. They can ring up adult social care or contact one of the other partner agencies involved in safeguarding in Newcastle. Just some top tips, some good practice when you are completing a safeguarding adults referral. I think the main one is if you follow the questions and the guidance and you answer the questions carefully, you should provide the information that is required. The The referral should evidence what you've seen or heard, when and who from. You should explain why you are worried. As Kerry said before, be explicit about what types of abuse or neglect you think is occurring and what you think the care and support needs of the adult at risk are. Why do you think they are unable to protect themselves from harm, or what's making it difficult for them to protect themselves from harm? I think we've said more than once already that the referral should evidence what the adult at risk wants to happen, if there is anything impacting upon their decision-making ability. If you're making the referral without engaging the adult and or their representative, explain why. So an example might be you think that would increase risks, or there's an immediate risk of harm, or perhaps you've become aware of the concern, but your role then doesn't bring you into further contact with that adult. We ask for some basic information about the alleged perpetrator. So do they have any care and support needs? Do they work with children or adults with care and support needs? So are they a person in a position of trust? Whether you have any history, or do you know any history of them posing a risk to others? We ask you to identify what you've tried already to reduce risk and meet the adult's needs. And we'd encourage you to include the details and outcomes of any referrals that you've made to other services or agencies. So, for example, if you've contacted the police, what was the result of that? Have you got an incident or log number that can be used on the referral? And again, that just helps the local authority when they're coordinating their inquiries and contacting all the relevant agencies to do that as quickly and as effectively as possible. Whether there are any protective factors in place, so that could be information about the people who are in that adult at risk's professional or informal support network, who might be protective factors at that time. We also ask whether the person would have a substantial difficulty in participating in the Safeguarding Adults process, and the term substantial difficulty is again is something from the Care Act. Because if that person would have a substantial difficulty, there is a duty to identify and appoint somebody who could support them in being involved in the Safeguarding Adults process. So you as referrer might know that there is a family member, for instance, who could be that person who supports and represents them. And finally, I think it's important to remember to separate facts and opinions. You can have a professional opinion, but make sure that this is clearly stated. Excuse me. So, for example, it might be that the adult said, I wanted to give the person money. However, in your professional view, you thought they were coerced into making that decision because, and then list the evidence that leads you to this opinion. So it might be that you've witnessed control or coercion, or you're worried about that person's ability to make decisions. So it's definitely okay to include professional opinion and views on referrals, but be very clear about that and what has led you to that professional opinion. Good to you, Kerry.
Thank you. So I thought it was helpful just to explain a little bit about the process of what happened, and that you understand the different kind of responses and different teams who might deal with a referral. Now, ideally, it would be great for every referral that comes in, we can get back to every single referrer to let you know what the outcome of that is. We used to do that, but unfortunately, you know, you saw that number of referral, over 20,000 referrals coming in. We just can't get back to everybody who puts a referral in. So I would ask, you know, if you can contact us, please contact us for a follow-up, and we'll be able to tell you what's happened. Every concern that comes in will go either to our adult MASH, so every case that is unallocated will come into our MASH. However, it's important that you know that referrals can go to other teams. So if there's an allocated worker, the referral will go to that team directly. It'll go direct to that worker or to the duty worker. However, if that person has a diagnosed learning disability or autism diagnosis, they would potentially go to our LDA, Learning Disability Autism team. If somebody's involved with secondary mental health services, those referrals would come in and they would go to our mental health team. Or if the person's in hospital, that could either go to the RVI or the Freeman social work team. So I know that can be really confusion about who might be dealing with that referral, but if you needed any advice or you needed an update on that, you can contact Social Care Direct and they'll be able to tell you where that referral's gone or direct you to the safeguarding unit or the team that's dealt with that. So it's just understand if something comes into the MASH, there are safeguarding adults managers that will be triaging every single one of those referrals that comes in to decide what action needs to happen as a result of that. If it's going to one of our other teams, it would be a social worker that's triaging that or a duty worker. And they're making the decision. So it's important that you do realise there are different decisions that might be made in different teams. And we talk about the process of escalation or challenging decisions that have been made about safeguarding. So we'll come on to that because it's important you know routes for being able to challenge that or escalate if you don't agree with that decision. And that's why we're really doing this webinar to try and help you to be able to make the best referrals you can so that you do feel the local authority are validating your concerns, they understand your concerns, but we can only do that on having that information that you can give us the most comprehensive information. So just so you're aware of that. So it'll come into us, a referral comes into whatever team, and then we're assessing, does it meet safeguarding criteria? And we've gone over what that criteria is. If it's agreed it's coming into safeguarding, if it isn't, we either hold it for information only on our system, or we might send it back to Social Care Direct or another team for some other adult social care intervention. But if it comes into safeguarding, we'll move to what's called stage 2, which allows us to start making inquiries. Again, the role of coming into safeguarding is a kind of a single point really of all that information referrals coming in. We check what's on our adult social care system, what other concerns have we had in, trying to build up a picture, and we then have that process to be able to ask other agencies for information. The Care Act's clear that other agencies should cooperate with us, and people should feel reassured sharing information under safeguarding or where there's risks of abuse or neglect. So we gather that information in and we look at and analyse what are the risks and what's already involved to manage those risks. So, there might already be various different agencies involved. There might be people trying to support that person. And actually, a decision might be made then. Yes, there are risks there, but the right people seem to be involved, and we're looking at what the person's views are. They're happy with their support. They're willing to engage in that support. So it might be actually, yeah, we're quite happy that can be closed down. So it's being looked at. We've gathered information from people and it's closed down at that point. Still means it's been looked at via a safeguarding team or a social worker, and they're quite happy with the plans that are in place. If it's very clear that, say, the person finds it really hard to engage in that process, services are really struggling to engage with the person, the risks are really high, or the dynamic, they're constantly changing. Maybe there are multiple different vulnerabilities the person has, or they've got multiple different care and support needs, and it seems a lot more complex. Or it might be obvious, do you know what, there's some key agencies missing from this support plan, or depend on the type of abuse that it is, then we might be needing to liaise with other people who are not involved to try and get that risk reduced and try some more creative, disruptive kind of actions. So it might then go to a strategy meeting. Not every referral goes to a strategy meeting. It's just to be clear about that. We'll have to be able to look at the risks and what's going on and make a decision. So it might go to a strategy meeting, people share information, they agree some actions, or the information that they then share, we then think actually the risk is not as bad as we thought it was, or things have improved. It could get closed down at a 3. It might mean that actually, no, we still need some further information, and we decide that we'll have a repeat strategy meeting. So we'll wait to get that information back in or some updates on actions. And we might then all feel satisfied that actually, yes, there is the support in place. We've got new people involved. The risk again is being managed as much as it can be, and we're working with the person. The cases that tend to go on to what we call a stage 4, which is your protection plan review meetings, are those cases where you're dealing with really high risk. It's really quite complex. Maybe there's multiple different forms of abuse and neglect occurring, multiple care and support needs, multiple vulnerabilities, or we're really struggling to engage the person in that risk plan. So we have to consider all of that, or there might be lots of actions we want people to do, and we have to continually review where we're at with those actions, or we know risks keep changing. So that's the kind of process that we go through. So it's just to stress really that referrals go to different teams, and there's various different reasons for that. Obviously, it's best it goes to a social worker who knows the case, who knows the person, to be able to assess that information. And there are different levels to safeguarding. Not every safeguarding referral will meet the higher level stages. They are the ones that are most complex and most high risk. But just because it's been looked at stage 2 doesn't mean it hasn't been looked at. It has. Just because safeguarding's been outcomed or closed at that stage, if risks continue or you get more and more information in, the situation changes, their engagement changes, you can refer back in again and tell us what's changed. We'd want to know what's changed since the last outcome was agreed. So it's really important that you're aware of that things do change. We know that, but let us know again whether things have changed. Can move on for me, Claire, please, if that's all right. One thing to highlight is really important for various different reasons is victim blaming language and stigma. We know we're working with a lot of adults who have experienced loads of different trauma and vulnerabilities, and they might have lots of different things going on in their life. And we know everybody's probably guilty of it. Sometimes it's really easy to think that person's making what we've heard people refer to as lifestyle choices, placing themselves at risk. They're not engaging, they did not turn up, and you can see some of the words there within that word art. But what we've found is, and we've had a lot of learning over the time, there's various different reasons that is not helpful. It's not helpful because obviously that's then put in somebody's records. We know that should somebody want to progress with the court proceedings, that third-party disclosure can be requested via those court proceedings. That all that information comes out in those, and that person gets to see those. And actually, any defence lawyer will just pull that to bit. And we've seen people being, determined as not being a credible witness because of what professionals have wrote about them. They fabricate, they lie, all of those really negative terms, or those terms that make the person seem as if they're responsible for the abuse that they're experiencing. It impacts on professionals' viewpoints and judgments and risk assessments. So, time and time again, if professionals are referring to people using that sort of language, that follows through case records, and it follows through to the next professional and the next professional that picks up that case, where they'll think, the person's got behavioural issues, or they're placing themselves at risk. They're choosing to associate with known drug users. They're choosing to do this. They're choosing to do that. And what we found that actually, especially in exploitative relationships, people have very little choices. And if you think in people with multiple different layers of vulnerability, experiencing multiple forms of harm, who are absolutely terrified that there's real risk to them for making disclosures or seeking support, that language doesn't help, and it makes professionals minimize risk and tolerate risk. And as I say, it places all the responsibility on that person for the abuse they're experiencing, then they might not even recognize it's happened to them, or if they do recognize it, they have very little choices or control over that. So really important to highlight, spend a little bit more time, what you're recording on that referral, but what you're recording in your own notes and how you're speaking about somebody. Really think about the context that they're in. We do have an adult exploitation language guidance. I would recommend you all have a look at that. It has some useful tips of different ways you could maybe record or document your concerns. And it gives you language that we really want you to avoid using wherever possible, please. So really important, please look at that guidance. On to the next one, Claire. So just a little bit of information, really. If you are invited to a strategy meeting or a protection plan review meeting, they are formal meetings, they are minuted. We have an agenda to follow. Now, safeguarding adults meetings might be chaired by team managers in social work teams, or you might find that they're being managed by the safeguarding adults unit and the safeguarding adults managers. And I'll touch on why a manager in the safeguarding adults unit might be chairing a meeting. But it's important that you know that they're the individuals and professionals that would be chairing those meetings. But they should all be sort of consistent. They should all be following the same agenda. They are confidential. You shouldn't be disclosing stuff that's discussed in a safeguarding adults meeting without the chair's consent of that. And what we really want to do is to try and support the service users or families where applicable to be attending their meetings. So please consider how, if they're engaging with yourself, how you can support them to be part of that meeting. Or if it's going to be too intimidating, we know some people don't like a formal meeting with lots of different people there, There is no reason why a chair of a meeting can't arrange to speak to that person separately, but let that chair know, and please let the chair know if the person's attending, so they can spend some time with that person before the meeting to explain the process. I think it's about being really clear as well when you're putting a referral in, and Claire's touched on making sure that if you're that lead person and you're that point of contact for someone, you're clear about not giving high or false expectations, whatever happened. It's really important that you know we can't visit every person that has a safeguarding referral come in. So I know sometimes professionals might expect a visit from the safeguarding team, but as I touched on before, if it's at initial inquiry stage at stage 2, we're not going to be able to go out and visit everybody. We might do a visit, but again, it depends on the referral, what information is contained in that. So it is really important that you're clear with that person to set expectations. But again, you can liaise with the social workers or the chair of meetings to be able to do that. We want to be able to be really clear with that service user what the aims of the safeguard inquiry is, and manage those expectations about what we're looking at and what's realistic. If they're not able to come to that meeting, really helpful if you know what their views are. You can help us understand why they might struggle to engage in the process, because we need to make sure that we have a plan around how their views are going to be represented. They shouldn't be represented via as just a social worker or paid employees. We need to make sure there's some sort of independent person there or an advocate. Please be prepared when you come to a meeting. It's really helpful if you've done a bit of digging, you've done research on your records around the person, their associates, who they live with, any addresses. Bring what you can, because it's really frustrating if people are then having to take actions to go away to find out information that they could have already brought to that meeting. Because again, it's better for the person. We need that information as soon as possible so we can get the right action straight away. Please check who's on the invite list for meetings. We can only go on what we know and what we've found out. You might look at that and go, oh, well, so-and-so wasn't on that list. Please let us know. Please let us know who's missing and who we need there if you know there's other people involved. And I would just say, you know, they are professional meetings, they are formal meetings, and it's just about being mindful of your professional conduct in those meetings. We're not there to point fingers at blame at anybody. We can challenge, but we need to do that respectfully. And it's not about all talking over each other at once. Please wait to be asked to be spoke. We need to have some order and agenda to the meetings, just for them being minuted and that it's clear. Everybody gets a chance to speak and give their update, and then we have the opportunity to be able to ask questions to people. So it just makes the meeting a lot more smoother, a lot more coordinated, and run a lot better, really, for trying to get the information and agree actions. Thank you. So ending a safeguarding adults inquiry, I know this could be difficult for people sometimes. I think what I've heard is that some people feel like when a safeguarding inquiry closes, they feel like they're left alone to manage something again, or it's left to one agency. When a safeguarding adults inquiry closed, it's not about it being left to one agency. There's usually still a risk plan that's been agreed, which is a multi-agency risk plan. That plan should continue. You know, even if a safeguarding adults inquiry closes, people should know who's involved then to continue to liaise and have MDTs and communicate with each other. Just because safeguarding's closed doesn't mean agencies still can't communicate together. And if risks increase again, or there's problems communicating and those risks have increased, refer back in again. But ending a safeguarding adults inquiry should be a multidisciplinary decision, especially when you're at strategy or protection plan review meeting levels. Everybody should agree. There will be times safeguarding has to close where there are ongoing risks. We know sometimes there's going to be ongoing risk, but it's about thinking, has everybody fulfilled their statutory responsibilities? Have we checked everything out that we're meant to? Have we done assessments of need? Is the plan as good as it can be? You know, and are the right agencies involved? And we know things take time. They're not fixed quickly. So maybe it's a plan in place. It needs time to work with that person. So, you know, safeguardings will end, and it's not about somebody being dumped on or left to manage. And sometimes it's about the lead agency continues that work, but refers back if things are not working or things are deteriorating again. And as I say, you can still communicate and liaise with agencies, because through the safeguarding process, you should know who's involved. And as I say, you re-refer. And remember, routes to escalation, support and advice. Everybody should be able to speak up in a safeguarding adults meeting. Share if you've got a different view. Share why it's important that you do that we consider something collectively and that you raise that concern. But if you're still worried about something not progressing or ending in safeguarding, seek escalation through your own agency. But you can also speak to us in the safeguarding adults unit at any point if you're worried about a case. And I think that leads us on nicely to the next slide about the unit. So just so you're aware about the safeguarding unit, we sit sort of independently, the safeguarding unit. The adult MASH sits under the safeguarding adults unit, and so do our best interest assessors and DOLs. But our safeguarding managers within the unit, there's an advice line every day, Monday to Friday, where a manager is there to be contacted. If you're not sure about a referral, if you need support, if you're not happy with the response to something, you want a query decision, you want a review of a case that you're really worried about, please give us a ring. We will contact you as soon as we can and get back to you to explore that with you. But our role in the unit is around looking at organisational abuse. So as the providers that we're worried about, care homes that we're worried about, that we need to look at from an organisational point of view. If there's any professionals in a position of trust you're worried about, again, liaise with the unit around that. We would also manage and chair meetings where we're concerned about prevent, honour-based violence, FGM, where there's multiple victims, multiple perpetrators. If we've got concerns around MDS, criminal sexual exploitation, home takeovers, also known as cuckooing to a lot of people. And if you've got concerns that people have got links to organised crime groups, urban street gangs or peer crime groups, please let us know in the unit as well. So we're there to seek advice from, and we take over those more complex safeguarding inquiries. So we are there as a point of contact, as well as your own safeguarding leads in your own organisation. Please use us, the numbers on there.
Thanks, Kerry. So it just leaves me to finish off with a few slides. And this slide is one of the things that's come out of our Safeguarding Adults Board discussions, and it's that people aren't always confident about where to go or what to do when they're worried about someone, but it's not for Safeguarding Adults. We know from that 20,000 number of referrals that we get in, we know that's people worried about somebody, but it's not always that Safeguarding Adults procedures is the right route for that worry or concern to be referred into. I think this slide comes with a huge disclaimer in that this could be a training session in itself, and that every circumstance that you come across is going to be different. But we just thought it would be quite good to highlight some of the other referral routes and referral pathways for support, particularly those that we see as high in terms of outcomes that don't get referred into Safeguarding Adults procedures. It might not be that you're necessarily making that referral yourself on behalf of that person. It might be that you're signposting the person to those services or support for them to do that themselves. Again, every situation or circumstance is going to be different. So right at the top there is Community Health and Social Care Direct, and you should be referring to them if you're worried that somebody isn't managing their care and support needs, or they need information and advice about care and support. So that was the biggest number of concerns that we get in that don't meet the criteria, are about general care and support, inquiries, signposting, assessment, review of needs. If you're worried about somebody's mental health, then there are a variety of routes, whether that's the person's GP, going through 111, crisis support services if somebody's at immediate risk in relation to their mental health, or talking therapies. If you're worried about someone's drug or alcohol use, again, the person's GP is often the first port of call, but we've also got Newcastle Treatment and Recovery Service, or NTAR for short. We've got the Harm Reduction Service, George Street Social, and PROPS, which is the carers support service for people who are supporting somebody with drug or alcohol needs. If you're worried that somebody's not managing financially and there isn't an abusive cause of that financial hardship, then there are a number of benefit and debt advice services in the city, and help for people to manage their money. And the link on the screen there just takes you to those various different services, whether that's welfare rights, citizens advice, money matters, lots and lots of support for people around money, particularly during this cost of living crisis. If you're worried about someone becoming or being homeless, they would need to seek help and support from the Homelessness Advice Centre, or HAC. If you're worried about domestic abuse and the victim isn't an adult with care and support needs, then that can be referred via the police and or to the Newcastle Integrated Domestic Abuse Service, or NIDAS, it's often shortened to. And finally, if you're worried about noise, antisocial behaviour, or the state of a property, and again, it's not necessarily linked to self-neglect or abuse or neglect, then it might be that environmental health could assist. And one final shout out for information now, because it might be that you're presented with a scenario that we've not listed on the screen there. Information Now is such a brilliant resource for the public and professionals alike, and is so easy to search. So you can type in what you need help with and there will be an article on it, and the identification of services to help and support with that concern. So there are lots of different services and support out there for people, and we'd encourage people to think about these options when the criteria for safeguarding adults hasn't been met. Another route for people to share information is via the police's partnership intelligence form. This form isn't to be used for reporting suspected crimes or safeguarding concerns, but any information that might assist the police really in preventing and detecting possible criminal activity. So it might be suspicious activity, a suspicious vehicle, something that just doesn't feel right. It might be a location or an address. You might have only partial information that's not sufficient to report a crime or a safeguarding concern, but it just doesn't sit right with you and there is a potential link to prevention or detection of crime. Then the police do have what's called the Police Partnership Intelligence Form, and that's submitted to their intelligence department, and they will look into it, see whether it marries up with any other intelligence they might have about a person, a place, or a vehicle. I think I'm right in saying that you're not usually contacted about the sharing of intelligence unless it's to give you feedback that you need to report it as a crime. But it's just another route, I guess, of sharing information when it might not necessarily be a safeguarding concern. So, just some key points for you to take away from this webinar. Safeguarding adults is a shared responsibility. Making a safeguarding adults referral doesn't end a person's role or responsibility in the safeguarding of that individual, nor does it give any magic powers or additional resources for the local authority or any other agencies. As Kerry said right at the very start, safeguarding adults is about utilising the existing resources, duties, responsibilities of all the agencies in the city who have got a responsibility around safeguarding adults. Adults at risk are put at the centre of any action we take, but, and big but, there are circumstances when that might not be possible and we have to take action without the consent of the adult at risk or against their wishes. Please be proactive in seeking feedback on referrals you make. As Kerry said, because of the volume of referrals that we're receiving at the moment, we can't always provide feedback on every single referral. So we would ask that you seek feedback if you want that and you're concerned. If you're unsure about whether your concern is for safeguarding adults, so whether it meets that safeguarding adults concern criteria, please seek advice, whether that's your safeguarding lead and or from the safeguarding adults unit. And if your concern isn't for safeguarding adults, please consider what other routes of help and support are available, because getting somebody referred through the right referral route or pathway first will hopefully support them in getting the help and the support they need quicker rather than going through the safeguarding route. And finally, just some tools, resources and links. These can all be accessed via our Newcastle Safeguarding website, which is newcastlesafeguarding.org.uk. That's got resources around safeguarding adults and safeguarding children. On that page, we've got a report of concern page within that website, and that's very visible from the home page. And again, that takes you to information about referring for adults and for children. We've got a guide about making a good safeguarding adults referral, which just goes through some of the information that Kerry and I have gone through. I mentioned the Making Safeguarding Personal short guide, and then there's information on the link there about the Safeguarding Adults unit. So that concludes the webinar on making a good safeguarding adults referral and the process that happens after a referral is made. We hope it's been helpful and increases your confidence in making a safeguarding adults referral. Thank you.
Thank you.